The axolotl. This salamander stays in its larval form its entire life, never fully maturing, and that arrested development is exactly why it can do what most vertebrates can't. It regrows limbs, spinal cord sections, heart tissue, and portions of its brain without leaving scars. When an axolotl loses a leg, specialized cells at the wound site form a structure called a blastema, which is essentially a mass of stem-like cells that rebuild everything from scratch. Bone, muscle, nerves, blood vessels, skin, all of it regenerates in the correct anatomical position over the course of several months. The same limb can be regrown hundreds of times across the animal's lifespan. What's happening here is a controlled reversion to an embryonic-like state, where cells dedifferentiate, multiply, and then redifferentiate into whatever tissue is needed. To put that in perspective, if a human lost an arm, the body would close the wound with scar tissue and call it done. The axolotl doesn't settle for that. It rebuilds the entire structure as if the injury never happened. Regrowing a limb takes months and enormous amounts of energy, but the alternative is death or permanent disability, so the investment makes sense. Scientists study axolotls obsessively, because if we could figure out how to activate this process in humans, we'd rewrite medicine. The axolotl has been doing this for millions of years. We're still taking notes. Deer antlers. Every year, male deer drop their antlers and regrow them from scratch, and the speed at which this happens is genuinely absurd. Antler regrowth is the fastest growing tissue in any mammal, adding over an inch per day during peak growth periods. A large buck can regrow 40 pounds of bone in just a few months. The antlers start as soft, blood-filled tissue covered in velvet, a fuzzy skin packed with blood vessels and nerves that supply nutrients to the growing bone beneath. As the antlers harden, the velvet dries up and the deer scrapes it off, leaving bare bone that's used for fighting and display during mating season. Then the cycle repeats. This isn't healing from an injury. This is deliberate, programmed regeneration of a complex skeletal structure, complete with branching points, weight-bearing architecture, and vascular networks. Most people don't think of antler growth as regeneration, but that's exactly what it is. Deer are the only mammals that fully regenerate a bony appendage on an annual basis, and they do it without hesitation, without error, and without leftover scar tissue. The energy cost is massive. Growing that much bone that quickly requires pulling calcium and phosphorus from the rest of the skeleton, meaning deer are literally mining their own bodies to build weapons they'll use for a few months and then discard. Evolution decided that trade-off was worth it. Sea cucumber. When threatened, this animal expels its internal organs out through its anus as a defense mechanism, and then regrows everything within a matter of weeks. It's called evisceration, and it's not accidental. It's a deliberate survival strategy. The sea cucumber ejects its intestines, respiratory structures, and sometimes its gonads in a tangled mess that distracts or entangles the predator while the cucumber itself crawls away, now hollow. Some species also expel sticky tubules that trap attackers in a web of goo. What happens next is where it gets uncomfortable. The sea cucumber doesn't die from this. It seals the wound, retreats to a safe spot, and begins rebuilding its entire digestive and respiratory system from scratch. Within 4 to 6 weeks, it has a completely functional set of new organs. The process involves stem-like cells in the connective tissue that migrate to the injury site, proliferate, and differentiate into intestines, lungs, and everything else that was sacrificed. To put that in perspective, imagine ejecting your stomach, lungs, and liver to escape a predator, surviving it, and then regrowing all of them in a month. That's what this animal does as a routine part of staying alive. The energy cost of regrowing your guts is brutal, but it's still cheaper than being eaten. And the sea cucumber has been making that calculation successfully for hundreds of millions of years. Octopus arms. An octopus can regrow a lost arm over the course of several months, and the complexity of what's being rebuilt is easy to understate. Each arm contains about 2/3 of the animal's neurons, meaning every arm is semi-autonomous with its own decision-making capability. Losing an arm isn't just losing a limb. It's losing a significant portion of distributed brain function. The regrowth process rebuilds muscle, suckers, chromatophores for color changing, nerve bundles, and the muscular hydrostat structure that allows the arm to move without a skeleton. This all happens through a combination of cell proliferation at the wound site and the migration of progenitor cells that differentiate into the specific tissue types needed. The new arm isn't identical to the original. Sometimes it's slightly shorter or the sucker arrangement is a bit different, but it's functional. What's wild is that octopuses can also self-amputate, intentionally dropping an arm if it gets caught in a trap or grabbed by a predator, the same way a lizard drops its tail. The arm keeps moving independently after detachment, distracting the threat while the octopus escapes. Then it starts the months-long process of building a replacement. The octopus doesn't get a choice about whether the investment is worth it. If it wants 8 arms again, it pays the cost. Zebrafish Hearts. This small freshwater fish can regenerate up to 20% of its heart muscle after injury, and that capability is almost unheard of in vertebrates. When part of a zebrafish heart is damaged, existing cardiac muscle cells near the injury site de-differentiate, meaning they revert to a less specialized state, then start dividing to create new tissue. They don't rely on stem cells for this. The heart rebuilds itself using its own existing muscle. The new tissue integrates with the old, restores function, and leaves minimal scarring. This happens over the course of weeks to months, during which the fish's cardiovascular system is operating under serious strain. Zebrafish can also regenerate fins, portions of spinal cord, retinas, and parts of their brain, but it's the heart regeneration that has researchers obsessed. Mammals can't do this. When a human has a heart attack, the damaged tissue is replaced with scar tissue that doesn't contract, doesn't conduct electrical signals properly, and weakens the heart permanently. Zebrafish just fix it. The energy cost of regrowing heart muscle is so high that the fish basically shuts down other processes to prioritize it. That's not just expensive, that's survival budgeting at the cellular level. If we could figure out how to activate the same process in humans, we'd eliminate heart failure as a leading cause of death. The zebrafish has been doing it effortlessly for as long as it's existed. By the way, if you're finding this stuff as fascinating as I am, I post content like this regularly. I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. Thanks. Hydra Polyps. This tiny freshwater organism continuously regenerates its entire body every few weeks and shows no signs of aging. Hydra are related to jellyfish and coral, and they exist in a state of perpetual cellular turnover. Every cell in a hydra's body is replaced approximately every 20 days through a process of constant division and migration. If you cut a hydra into pieces, each piece regenerates into a fully functional new individual. The regeneration is driven by 3 populations of stem cells that are continuously active, constantly producing new tissue to replace old tissue. Because of this, hydra don't accumulate the cellular damage that causes aging in most animals. They're not immortal in the sense that they can't be killed. They can be eaten, starved, or poisoned, but they don't die of old age. In laboratory conditions, hydra have been observed for years without showing any decline in reproductive capability or increased mortality rates over time. The trade-off is that this constant regeneration requires a steady supply of food and energy. A starving hydra will actually digest parts of itself to survive, shrinking down to a fraction of its original size, and then regenerate back to full size when food becomes available again. The hydra has effectively solved the aging problem by never allowing its cells to get old in the first place. It just keeps rebuilding. Newt lenses. Certain species of newts can regenerate eye lenses and retinal tissue multiple times throughout their lives, even as adults. When a newt's lens is removed, either through injury or experimentally, cells from the iris, the colored part of the eye, undergo a process called transdifferentiation. They literally change identity, converting from pigmented iris cells into lens cells. Over the course of weeks, a new functional lens forms, and the newt's vision is restored. This can happen up to 18 times in a single individual without failure. Newts also regenerate limbs, tails, jaws, portions of heart tissue, and sections of spinal cord. But the eye regeneration is particularly striking because we think of eyes as irreplaceable. In humans, lens damage leads to cataracts or blindness. In newts, it's a temporary inconvenience. The process was first documented in the early 1900s and is called Wolffian regeneration, after the scientist who described it. Regrowing an eye lens 18 times over a lifetime means dedicating a significant portion of your metabolic resources to rebuilding something most animals get one shot at. The cost keeps adding up, and they keep paying it. The fact that this happens in a vertebrate, an animal with a body plan similar to ours, makes it especially interesting for regenerative medicine research. If newts can do it, the genetic toolkit might exist in other vertebrates, including us, just waiting to be activated. Anole Lizard. This lizard regrows its tail after self-amputation, and the regrown tail is surprisingly anatomically precise. When threatened, the green anole can drop its tail at predetermined fracture planes in the vertebrae. The tail keeps thrashing after detachment, distracting the predator while the lizard escapes. Regrowth begins almost immediately. A wound epithelium forms over the stump within hours, and beneath it, a blastema starts organizing. The new tail grows out over about 60 days, and while it doesn't have true vertebrae, it does have a cartilage rod that provides structural support, along with regenerated muscle, nerves, blood vessels, and skin. The muscle in the regrown tail even shows functional patterns, meaning it's not just a fleshy stump, it's a working replacement. The lizard can repeat this process multiple times, though each successive regrowth is slightly less perfect. The color patterns might not match exactly, and the length might be a bit shorter, but it's functional enough for balance and fat storage. What's interesting is that the genetic program for tail regeneration is still active in the lizard's genome throughout its life. It doesn't lose this ability as it matures the way mammals lose most regenerative capabilities after early development. The lizard just keeps the option available, and if it needs to use it, the body knows exactly what to do. If this sparked your curiosity, consider subscribing so you don't miss future animal content. Thanks for watching.